Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. The Nagoya Basho starts in just over a week, and that means it's time for a weekend tier list. I was gonna have this done on Friday, but Friday was July 4th, aka America Day, and I may have felt compelled to try and do something entertaining about it. But the majority of our audience isn't American, and to be frank, I get the feeling y'all are kinda sick of our shit at this point. You just want a tier list, right? So let's just do up a tier list. We'll start with the obvious kings of the road, Onosato and Hoshoryu. Or Hoshoryu and Onosato. I'm not arguing that. The stan rage has already started. As the two Yokozuna, they're expected to have the same schedule, the Maegashira down through Tamawashi and then the Sanyaku. With respect to track record, Hoshoryu's longer stretch at the top means he's proven himself dominant over a larger chunk of those prospective opponents. Onosato's numbers aren't quite as dominant because he started out alternating wins against several top wrestlers and he hasn't had time to really pull away in those head-to-heads. For example, he's only 5-4 against Kotozakura, but he's won the last 3. 2-2 against Takayasu, but won the last 2. Wakataka Kage, Abi, Oho, similar stories. He even lost his only meeting with Kinbozan. On the flip side, Hoshoryu's been absolutely crushed by Abi and Takayasu, while Onosato's only problematic matchup is Hoshoryu. So do you trust Hoshoryu more to maintain his consistency in his many strong matchups and perhaps finally figure out Darth or Papa Bear? Or do you trust Onosato more to keep it rolling, avoid silly losses, and maybe even find a second win against Hoshoryu? Onosato's promotion to Yokozuna felt like an inevitable coronation, and it's hard not to favor him until someone gives a clear reason to do otherwise, but I don't think the gap will be that big in Nagoya. Got another connected pair in A tier with Kusano and Takerufuji. And it's not just the obvious connection of them both being in Izagahama stable. Takerufuji steamrolled through the lower ranks but was still just vulnerable enough that he never won a title in either Division 3 or 4. Kusano qualified for a head start at the bottom of Makushita, but not only did he never win the division, he kept slipping worse as time went on. 6 wins to start, then 2 5-2s and 2 4-3s. As dangerous as he looked, something was missing. In Makushita, both of them sometimes fell to being outmaneuvered, slapped down, tactics like that. But once Rikishi get to the salaried ranks, there's a certain expectation they'll fight more quote-unquote appropriately, more straight up. We saw it with Takerufuji, where that played directly into his strengths and he completely popped off. The same thing happened in Kusano's absolutely bananas 27-3 run through Juryo. That doesn't mean I think Kusano's gonna raffle stomp to a debut Yusho like Takerufuji did. Simply having Hoshoryu and Onosato as legit Yokozuna puts the kibosh on that. In fact, if you look at the few losses he did have in Juryo, he appears to be vulnerable at higher levels to the same thing as Takerufuji, guys who either get the jump on pushing them back or can stand up to them and turn the push back on them. That being said, I don't think too many guys at the bottom of the division can do that, and Kusano's got a great chance of starting like 8-2 before the big shots come calling and show him what's up. If he gets locked in against a lot of Sanyaku opponents for some reason, maybe he only finishes 9-6, but that would be unusual for someone at the bottom of Makuuchi, so he should hit 10 or 11 wins. As for Takerufuji, I know watching him fall flat on his face in May can make him seem kinda mid, but this is the guy who's like 41-8 in Makuuchi against guys who haven't recently been in the Sanyaku, and nobody he's expected to fight has been in the Sanyaku recently. At 6 East, a strong start will probably get him yeeted to the top as soon as he hits 8 wins, maybe even 7 if he's 7-0 or 7-1. And it's a lot more possible for him to get an unfortunate number of Sanyaku opponents that'll tank his record. He's fairly likely to hit 10 wins, but he's more likely than Kusano to get stuck on 9. Still, odds of 10 are good enough that I'm willing to put him in A tier. So S tier is the two Yokozuna, and A tier is the two noticeably underranked wrestlers. Is B tier just as easy to describe? Unfortunately for those who want some spicy picks, yes, it's the 3 Sekiwake. They're only clear underdogs to the two Yokozuna and Aisho to Tamawashi, but that match might not happen, so things shouldn't go too badly. But there aren't as many clearly favorable matchups this time either. All 3 have also shown out completely when they've had to go with the new hotshots coming up: Oshoma, Aonishiki, Onokatsu, and Hakuoho, and maybe Kinbozan if you want to include him, so they'll probably do fine in those matches. However, young hotshots should eventually figure out the veterans, it's just a matter of when. And there are enough coin flip matches that, even though at least one of them will probably hit 10 wins, it could be any of them. There was a potentially spicy pick for B tier, but instead he goes to the top of C+. Ura. Apart from Takerufuji, he's either strong against his probable opponents or he should be no worse than 50-50 to win. It would be stunning if he got through the first 10 days at 5-5 or worse. From there, he should be able to waltz to a winning record. The only reason I'm slightly hesitant is that he lost his most recent matches to Gonoyama and Ichiyamamoto in matchups he previously dominated. I'm not holding his 5-10 record for Mei against him too much because the lineup was absolutely brutal, but if he's lost even a half step, he might drop a couple matches he otherwise wouldn't. But I might also be feeling the sting of Tobizaru falling short in Mei. Pinky should do fine. Takanosho. Good old steady Takanosho. He had a favorable lineup in Mei, ran it to 8-5, then slid to 8-7. This time the lineup looks even better. Kotoshoho is the only guy lower than him who's been an issue, and they're far enough apart that they may not fight. Like with Ura, there's a good argument for him to sit in B tier, but he's lost his last two to Ura, Chiyoshoma, and Shodai, and if those guys are starting to figure him out, that makes 7-9 wins a safer bet than 8-10. But I very much like his chances of another winning record. Kotozakura. Yes, the only Ozeki is down here at C+. The fact he's an Ozeki is the only reason he's even this high in C+. If he's doing okay, he might get to fight lower ranked contenders, which will probably be good for him. But at this point, he's likely to get flattened by Hoshoryu, Onosato, and Kirishima. Then, even if he's a reasonable favorite against the newer guys, he's also potentially the most vulnerable, especially if his knee is acting goofy. He needs to get his wins early because his 8-4 start to 8-7 finish in Mei could become the norm for him. Endo. Endo is like Roga and Mei, rating highly thanks to a plethora of strong matchups. I'm not quite as hopeful as with Roga because Takerufuji, Ura, and Hiradoumi are all terrible fights for him, but he has a great track record against Ichiyamamoto, Meisei, and Atamifuji, and should probably be a small favorite against 4 others. Even if that just gets him to, say, 6-5, odds are he'll fight down in rank rather than up, and at that point it really depends who he gets. He has some awful matchups further down, like Takanosho and Midorifuji, and some quite good ones, like Asakoryu and Shodai. Cross your fingers, but he should do alright. Shishi. Similar to Endo, Shishi is C+ on the strength of his matchups. He's had a little trouble finding his footing in Makuuchi, but fortunately he's got a bunch of Juryo regs to fight. I see half a dozen good matchups, with Kusano as the only real problem. Of the favored matchups, Mitakeumi could be trouble since they'll likely fight on day 2 or 3, but otherwise I think he'll do fine against the group. It's also helpful that he's quite good against smaller opponents, and he'll get not just Fujinokawa, but possibly Asakoryu and Midorifuji as well. He's going to injury tier because last Basho was obviously a problem, and we have no idea how he is physically. If whatever afflicted him is gone though, this is a good chance for him to solidify his spot in the division. Gonoyama. Gonoyama doing decently outside the Joy is a less obvious pick than it might seem. His only genuinely good probable fight is with Tobizaru. Whether Ura goes back to clowning him or his win in January was a sign of things to come might say a lot about his Basho overall. The main plus for him though is that if he just shuffles along to an even-ish record through day 10, Maegashira 6 tends to fight down in rank rather than up. And if he does fight up, he still has some decent matchups in upper Maegashira. He should be able to swing those 8 wins. Meisei. Moving towards the end of C+, we have Meisei. Takerufuji, Endo, and Ura usually beat him sideways, but he can make up some of that against Ichiyamamoto and Chiyoshoma. Outside of those, he has a lot more somewhat favorable fights than somewhat unfavorable ones, which is why I'm leaning towards a more positive record. The issue here is what his schedule is going to look like later on. Guys have been pretty healthy recently, so I'm not counting on injury forcing him into Sanyaku fights that'll tank his record. But if a couple guys do get hurt, this could go very wrong very quickly. Next is Atamifuji in injury tier as usual. But even if we ignore his hip, he's hardly a shoo-in for a winning record. I don't expect him to start out too well, his probable lineup looks rough. He does fine against Roga, but Takanosho, Endo, Churanoumi, and Asakoryu are all problems. But a lot of his final record will depend on his schedule. Maegashira 10 often fights more up in rank, but if the end of the Basho sees him fight M13 and down, he has a ton of great matchups to feast on. So if a good record might make his life harder, but a poor record will make his life easier, I think he's more likely than not to hit 8 wins. Churanoumi. Churanoumi is the absolute weirdest guy in the sport right now. Over the last year, he's had double-digit wins 3 times and double-digit losses 3 times. The The last time someone did that, managing to stay on Maegashira the whole time, was Kyoku Tenho in 2012. It doesn't happen often, and it makes predictions incredibly hard. The one trend I did find is that when he does well, he tends to get several wins against guys where he has a poor head-to-head record. When he does poorly, everything goes a little more by the numbers. This isn't too shocking since it took him quite a while to reach this level, so there are opponents he struggled against who he now can take on reasonably well. But that still doesn't explain the swings. This time he's got 3 good matchups, 2 bad ones, and several question marks. This should lean him towards a winning record. If he goes double digits again, it should definitely be on the winning side. I have no idea how he'll get there, but clearly he might. Shodai. It's always a sketchy thing predicting any sort of success for the Dark Lord, but this basho should be pretty good for him. Like Shishi, he tends to be able to handle smaller wrestlers despite other struggles. He already does quite well against Midorifuji, but that trait should prove handy against Asakoryu and Fujinokawa as well. He's also been quite good against Kotoshoho and will probably get Mitakeyumi late enough that Mitakeyumi will be less of a challenge. Considering Churanoumi is his only bad expected matchup, he'd have to really try to screw this up. And he probably will try, but he'll screw that up, so he'll still be okay. Kotoshoho. Finally, for C+, we've got injury tier Kotoshoho. He came back in May after missing 5 days with a leg injury, looked great for a while, then slowed down and then kinda fell apart. In a situation like that, you don't want to assume someone's healthy without clear news of that being the case. If he is though, he should do fine. There's genuinely not a lot to say here. Mitakeyumi's a great matchup, Shodai's a terrible one. Tamashoho, who would be his Juryo opponent if that happens, is a great matchup. Churanoumi is a terrible one. The rest overall goes slightly in his favor, so he can sit at the end of C+. But this injury isn't the only one he's had in the last year or two, so if you're thinking about picking him for a fantasy game, he's still kinda buyer beware. There are a lot of good wrestlers I have in the 6 to 8 win range, and a few of them will probably make me look silly, but I calls them as I sees them. Let's start with Asakoryu. Of all these guys, Asa was the closest to being pushed to C+. Purely by the numbers, his expected matchups are fine. Not great, not terrible. As the basho goes on, the further down the ranks he fights, the better he should do. Even if he's pushed up, he's been great against Sadanoumi and back and forth with Chiyoshoma, so it's not hopeless. What nudges him down to C- is the fact he's got to face Takanosho, Midorifuji, Churanoumi, and Kusano, who he's fought once each and lost all of them. That's not a great start. Then there's Shodai and Fujinokawa, who he's never fought, but who also look ready to pose problems. Usually when there's a minimal track record against several opponents, I assume those will be split, but in this case it looks worse than that. I can definitely see him going 6 and 9, but not really 9 and 6, so into C- he goes. Abi. Like most of the Sanyaku and Sanyaku adjacent Rikishi, Abi is very back and forth with most of the guys he'll fight. Daisho's been kicking his ass, Oho's been trouble, and Onosato is Onosato, but he does okay against most of the rest. The issue for him is that it's only okay, not all that great. Hoshoryu is the only guy he's really blasted over the last several months. That's not much to lean on, especially when it's one of the Yokozuna, who should eventually figure out what to do. It also doesn't help that he's lost his one match against Oshoma, Onokatsu, and Hakuoho, and that Aonishiki will likely be less vulnerable to his pulldowns if he doesn't get blasted out of the ring right away. I know it always feels like Abi can potentially go off in a big way, but he's been Makekoshi the last 3 tournaments and only had more than 8 wins once in the last year. July is not set up well for him to break that streak. Wakamotoharu. Wakabro's in a very similar spot to Abi. We got used to seeing him have some pop-off bashos, but if you look at his 10 and 11 win tournaments at the end of 2024, the level of competition is just not what it's gonna be this time. Plus, he started 1 and 5 in May, and there's no reason to think this basho will be much better. He's 1 and 9 combined against Hoshoryu, Onosato, Daisho, and Kirishima in 2025. Kotozakura is a back and forth matchup. He beat a completely busted Takayasu in May, but Papa Bear usually owns that matchup, so health will play a big role there. His only genuinely good matchup against a Sanyaku is against Oshoma. Yeah, Oshoma beat him near the end of May, but I've never seen Oshoma looked as motivated as he did with the Sanyaku in sight. Maybe that Oshoma comes back for all of July, but I won't count on it until I see it. So, even if you give Waka the advantage against a lot of the up-and-comers, there just aren't enough of them to make up for the blasting he's likely to take against the Sanyaku. It's only out of respect for what he's done in the past that he's even this high in C-. Tobizaru. Tobi's a little hard to read in that his Mei Basha went largely by the numbers, but he still couldn't swing a winning record despite being set up well to do it. He got a little bit screwed by the schedule, pulling a rampaging Kinbozan near the end, and then Wakatake Kage when he was fighting for his 8th win because everyone ahead of him did so terribly. But if things go by the numbers again, July is not going to be as friendly as May. Gonoyama's back to kicking his ass, Hiradoumi's in range now, he's never faced Takerufuji, but that looks like a real bad matchup. He won his last one against Atamifuji, but that was his first win in 7. He might dodge Hakuoho, but if not, that might be the worst fight of the bunch. On the flip side, he's been great against Ichiyamamoto, Chiyoshoma, and Tamawashi, and he should handle most lower ranked guys if that's what the end of the basho serves up. I can definitely imagine him starting poorly, then coming back for 8 or even 9 wins on the back of a friendly schedule, but that's just too many ifs and maybes to rely on. Aonishiki. I want to have hope for Aonishiki, I really do. Problem is, he's had a shot at some of the top guys already, and it hasn't gone well in any case. He's also proven extremely vulnerable to big quality pushers. Kinbozan and Daisho basically wrote the blueprint for beating him. Onosato's definitely going to follow it. Oho should if he's in a good mental place, but that's not a given. Takayasu should, but health might limit his effectiveness. Abi's pushing style is a little different, so it remains to be seen if Aonishiki can find a way inside there or if it's just as bad for him. Hell, Tamawashi stands to be a problem if they end up fighting. Add to that the fact he's succeeded because he has quite a skill set for a fairly new Rikishi, and now he's got guys like Hoshoryu and Kirishima to contend with whose skill sets are even broader. I definitely think he's going to pull a couple surprises, and Akachi Koshi isn't completely out of reach. Every way I look at it though, it's just a 2-week wake-up call. He'll figure things out, but not until they all beat his ass first. Roga. Roga was very Roga in May, coming out of the gate hot as expected, and then collapsing when his strong record landing him fights with higher level guys. Sitting at Maegashira 10 West may be lucky or unlucky. Takerufuji and Kusano are far enough away that he might avoid both of them, but he might also get both of them as well. Considering his lineup isn't nearly as friendly as in May, and you have to go all the way down to Kotoshoho and Hiradoumi to find anything that looks like a dominant matchup, and this one's got 7 and 8 written all over it. Fujinokawa, now that the actual spelling's been pointed out, is unsurprisingly the biggest question mark of the tournament. He's been outstanding against Kotoeiho, he's split matches with Hiradoumi, and also against Tochi Taikai, who would likely be his opponent if he gets someone from Juryo. Outside of them though, he has no more than 1 match against anyone he's likely to fight. So, without much track record to lean on, I'm placing him at C- for 2 reasons. 1, he's got to fight Shodai and Shishi, who, as mentioned earlier, are generally strong against smaller opponents. And 2, there are a lot of guys in his neighborhood who can match his mobility. Tokihayate, Midorifuji, Asakoryu, hell, even Kayo might give him some issues. I think he can do well enough to stay in the division in July, but like Asakoryu, he probably needs a little experience before he knows how to leverage his strengths well enough to succeed at this level. Hiradoumi. The biggest dilemma for figuring out how Hiradoumi will do is that he's next in line for Sanyaku matches if there are any injuries or just enormous failures above him. His likely schedule from Maegashira 3 or so on down isn't terrible, and he's pretty good against the top Maegashira guys as well if the schedule goes that way. But anything better than 9 wins would be remarkable, and there are a lot of ways the schedule could go wrong and stick him with some really difficult matchups up top. If he was even a half rank further back, I'd like his chances more. So if everyone from Maegashira 4 up stays healthy and halfway competitive, he's a C+ pick. I just never trust that to happen. Tokihayate. Here's the thing about getting your Kachikoshi with a weird false start that wasn't called on day 15. Your life just gets harder in the next tournament. There are a lot of guys around him who've been a major hassle. I'm sort of curious how he'll do against Ura, seeing as he's 0-2, but those matches happened in 2020. But it probably doesn't matter that much. If he starts out decently, there's a better chance of him fighting higher ranked opponents, and those are scary matchups. His hopes for another 8 wins really come from getting a friendly schedule down the ranks, where he should be no worse than 50-50 against everyone but Shishi, and a favorite in several fights. It's a lot to hope for though. 8 wins seems like a reasonable best case scenario. Kayo! Where Churanoumi the guy who keeps having final records all out of line with what should happen, Kayo's the guy who will probably keep having relatively expected final outcomes, but with a whole sheet of surprising wins and losses. In this case, I don't see a single good matchup for him. Takayumi will come calling early, he's 2-1 against Kotoeiho, but that's alternating wins, which doesn't mean much. Hell, he's probably the one Makuuchi guy Hiradoumi looking forward to fighting. And looking over all the opponents he's never faced, I can't find one where I'd favor Kayo to win. His completely bananas May, from 0-4 to 4-4 to 4-6 to 7-6 to 7-8, with a schedule that didn't look any friendlier going in than this one in July, is the main reason I'm still putting him at C-. He shouldn't get a winning record, but I wouldn't bet against him finding a way. Midorifuji. If we might recall May, Midori started 0-9. Those 9 losses included Shodai, Churanoumi, Takanosho, and Shishi. The first 3 will definitely be on his lineup card in July, and Shishi might end up there as well. Roga fights him tough too. Tokihayate is his only really good matchup. Midori's hope comes from 3 sources. 1, he's stablemates with Atamifuji and Kusano, and not having to fight them is a huge plus. 2, he's a combined 4-0 against Tokihayate and Asakoryu, which suggests he should do well against Fujinokawa. And 3, if he gets matched against higher ranked guys, he's good against several of them. I can't imagine another 0-9 start, but this one does look like another rough beginning followed by a comeback is in the cards. They're fun to watch, but they're not reliable for even getting 2 8 wins, much less beyond. Ichiyamamoto. Endo, Tobizaru, Takerufuji, and Meisei all smoke poor Ichi. Same for Ura and Takanosho, although he just got his first win in those head-to-heads, so maybe there's a glimmer of hope there. He struggles against Tokihayate as well. He has positive matchups, but that's far too many guys who normally feast on him to have much hope. As with others at C-, his main hope for 8 wins comes from further down the ranks. At Maegashira 8, he shouldn't get any opponents from the Joy. If he can get 4 or 5 opponents from, say, Maegashira 13 on down, he could stage a massive comeback. It's not likely, but the way scheduling works, it's not completely implausible. Kotoeiho. Whatever you expect Fujinokawa to do, I expect Kotoeiho to do less. No shade to the guy, he's young and he's really coming into his own, and even though he's on the smaller side, it's not to the same degree as Fuji. But of the guys on the docket who he's faced before July, his only winning record is 1-0 against Takayumi. And as with anyone at the bottom of the division, the competition only gets harder the further along he goes. He could 7-8 his way to staying in Makuuchi, and because he's young and probably going to go super all out, maybe he could get on a roll to 8 wins. But more than that, I just have no idea where those wins would come from. Kinbozan. I've shit-talked Kinbozan before, but what we've seen in 2025 is that he's not that bad of a wrestler. And I'm not putting him way down here because he's bad, nor is it a pure numbers thing. He's only had 2 matches against Hoshoryu, 1 each against Daisho and Wakatakakage. But what odds do you actually place on him beating them? Hell, Oshoma's whipped him 4 times straight, Onokatsu took both of their matches, he's 1-3 against Oho, he's proven capable of blasting through Aonishiki and Hakuoho, and going down, Tamawashi and Hiradoumi are good fights for him as well. If Takayasu's a mess, he can probably win that too. So give him all 5 of those. Are there 3 more wins somewhere in there? Maybe, but that's even assuming he wins all 5 of those matches. And it's hard to win literally every single match against a given opponent over a long enough period of time. The reason he's C- instead of D is purely that there's this itch in my brain that says 8 and 7 is possible. I can't see how it happens, but I think he'll get at least 6 wins, so if 8 can happen, C- is more correct. Hakuoho. This is a joke, right? I can't possibly have Hakuoho this low, can I? Well, obviously I can and I do. I didn't expect it going in, but you look at his competition in July and he seems to be in for an absolutely miserable time. He hasn't had a lot of shots at the top guys, but when he has, it's gone horrendously. He's 0-7 combined against the Yokozuna down through the Sekiwake. He's also 0-2 against Kinbozan and Tamawashi. Like Aonishiki, he's very vulnerable to strong pushers coming in and hitting him right away. The difference between him and Aonishiki is that we've actually seen it more with him, and as such have seen he hasn't figured out what to do about it yet. Even his fights down in rank aren't all that good. Meisei's beaten him twice in a row, he's 1-3 against Gonoyama, although they haven't fought in a while, so who knows there. His slim chance of a winning record rests on getting scheduled against guys like Tobizaru, Endo, Churanoumi, and Ichiyamamoto later in the Basho, but even that's only likely to happen if he's doing pretty badly. I'm not putting him in D tier because he's young and developing, and like Aonishiki, might have some surprises in store, but he'll need a lot of surprises ready. Finally, Takayasu. Even in injury tier, I can't put poor Papa Bear above C-. Like Abi, Takayasu's best recent matchup is Hoshoryu, which is always a little tougher to trust than if he was blasting anyone else. Oho is a good fight for him as well, but that's not much for a guy whose body rarely seems to hold up when he's in the Sanyaku. If the duct tape does somehow hold him together, we know he can do big things, I just wouldn't rely on it happening. Onokatsu. I really struggled with putting Onokatsu at the bottom of C- or here at the top of D. Unlike Hakuoho, Onokatsu hasn't had his shots at the top guys. That said, 3 of his 5 losses in May were to Aonishiki, Hakuoho, and Oshoma, all of whom he's probably fighting this time. To make things worse, he's also 0-3 against Wakataka Kage and 0-1 against Oho. And who among the top 5 guys do you really think he'll beat? 1-4 against that group would be solid. Combine that with the fact that at Maegashira 3, he's less likely to get those favorable lower ranked matchups than Hakuoho at 4, and it's D tier for Onokatsu. Oho. It remains strange to put Oho in D tier when we know he's capable of beating the top guys. Remember, he started May 3-0 by beating Koto, Kiri, and Hoshoryu, but then he got whomped by everyone else worth their silk, and he only recovered to 7-8 by winning 4 of 5 at the end against opponents struggling even worse. If he couldn't hit 8 wins with a godlike start and a much friendlier set of opponents than he'll have in July, there's no reason to expect him to do any better here. Churanoumi. I can hear some people say, Spiff, D tier? Really? Didn't you have Churanoumi at the end of C- last time, and didn't he punk your ass with a 10-5? These things are true, I can't deny them. It was a valuable lesson in how to look through these matchups and try to make appropriate adjustments. That being said, a large part of the reason I expected him to do poorly was because he had 5 bad matchups in just 9 expected fights I looked at. Much to my surprise, despite being at 13 West, he managed to avoid his 2 bad matchups at Maegashira 11 with Endo and Shishi. Kotoshoho missed the first part of the basho with an injury and was clearly slowing down by the time they fought on day 14. And Shonanoumi was Shonanoumiing all over the place. At Maegashira 8, it doesn't look like any of that good fortune is likely to kick in. In the 10 main fights I'm looking at, there's another 5 bad matchups, and I don't think he's likely to skip any. Maybe Meisei. But if he dodges Meisei, then matchups in the other direction lead to Takanosho, who beats him worse. Being D tier instead of C- comes from the fact that if he gets put against guys lower in rank, a lot of those are pretty bad matchups too. The whole division looks bad for him this time. Oshoma. We can keep this brief. There's one way in which Oshoma makes me look silly, and that's if the hyper-motivated version of him we saw the last 2 days in May shows up for the whole basho in July. Even if that happens though, there are 7 other guys in the Sanyaku, and the only one he's ever beaten is Wakataka Kage. He's not actually too bad against the high Maegashira wrestlers, so I don't think he'll be a disaster, but as a Komusubi, it's unlikely he'll avoid any of the other Sanyaku guys, and I don't see him getting enough Maegashira wins to make up for that. Tamawashi. Unfortunately for Father Christmas, the elves making the Banzuke set him up pretty badly. He might start out well since he's good against Hakuoho and Hiradoumi, and he'll probably get Onokatsu at some point too. But once the Sanyaku come through, he's gonna get bombed. Like Oho, he largely got crushed by the Sanyaku in May and only recovered on the backs of guys doing even worse. More unfortunate still, the Sanyaku matches will come late enough that if he's doing badly and gets pulled from some of those fights, he might not get to fight Daisho, the one Sanyaku guy he does really well against. It's just all bad for Tamawashi. Chiyoshoma. Given that Chiyoshoma was just in and around the Joy and had a few decent bashos, it might be surprising to see him this low. But that's what happens when almost everybody in sight and their moms beat you with regularity. Tokihayate is his one good matchup. He's done well against Gonoyama, but to be honest, whether that continues depends on how willing Gono is to engage his brain. So, Chiyo probably wins that. But even past the expected matchups, Midori beats him, Shodai beats him, there's just not much to be positive about here. Hiradoumi. Bless his non-gambling heart, Hiradoumi is finally back in the top division after 3.5 years away. But when someone takes 3.5 years to get back, and it wasn't from a Terunofuji style injury absence, staying in the division is an uphill climb at best. He's actually done pretty well against Kotoshoho and Kayo, and Midorifuji back in the day. Look further up the Banzuke though, where his later day opponents will come from, and it's like, who exactly is he gonna beat? 6 and 9 will be a moral victory. And Mitakeumi. I feel so bad stuffing Mitakeumi at the back of the line, but it's the only place for him to go. Hiradoumi is the only guy, literally the only guy, who he can be considered a favorite against. He might get off to a good start, but after day 6 or so, as the opponents get better and his body starts to fade, the whole thing's gonna fall off a cliff. And that's our tier list for July 2025. Yeah, there's a lot of guys down in the losers or barely winning bracket, which means the recap will probably be about which picks I completely flubbed. But that's what makes this fun, right? No breakdown before the Basho this time. I had a hard drive crash and lost several Bashos worth of footage. I'm rebuilding the stockpile, but I haven't had a good chance to eat up all our bandwidth downloading it. I am going to try to get the video about Elder Stock done though, since this is the first Basho without Hakuoho as part of the system. Anyway, wish me luck on that, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.